Okay, let's jump right in, because there's a real puzzle at the heart of India's economy right now. On the one hand, you see these incredible headline numbers that tell a story of amazing success. But if you just peel back one layer, well, the picture starts to look a lot more complicated, even a little worrying. It's really a tale of two economies living side by side. In one corner, the story looks fantastic, right? GDP growth is booming at around 8.1%, and there's massive government spending on big infrastructure projects. But in the other corner, you've got some pretty serious red flags waving. The currency's hitting record lows, volatile oil prices are a huge threat, and the country's financial safety net is actually shrinking. So what gives? How can both of these things be true at the same time? That is the big mystery we're going to unpack in this explainer. And the answer reveals a really deep structural vulnerability right at the foundation of the economy. To really get this, we have to start with the first big clue, the key that unlocks this whole thing. It's all about one single critical vulnerability, and it has everything to do with how India is connected to the rest of the world. And it really all comes down to this one number, 85%. Think about that for a second. That is the staggering amount of crude oil India has to import. This massive dependency makes the country's entire economic health incredibly sensitive to any kind of instability anywhere on the globe. Yeah, you can think of it like this. Oil prices aren't just about what you pay at the pump. They are the main pipeline through which global shocks, like geopolitical conflicts, flow directly into India's economic bloodstream. And the impact is absolutely huge. Get this, just a $10 jump in the price of crude oil can blow a $10 billion hole in the country's finances. That's not just a number on a spreadsheet. That is a massive financial shockwave from a single price bump. So what happens when a shockwave like that hits? Well, it doesn't just stop at the border. No way. It sets off a powerful chain reaction, a kind of domino effect that ripples through every single part of the economy. And here's exactly how those dominoes fall. It all starts with some kind of global event that makes oil prices spike. Immediately, that puts a huge squeeze on government finances. And that pressure, it doesn't just disappear. It gets passed right down the chain, eventually landing squarely on households and industries. Now, at the heart of the government's budget, you've got this really tricky balancing act. A lot of the spending, the capital expenditure, is going to great long-term investments like new roads and ports. But the money for all the day-to-day costs, the revenue expenditure, is much more volatile. When an oil shock hits, bam, that's while the pressure really starts to build. So to shield people from those soaring fuel prices, the government's first move is often to just cut its own taxes on fuel. But man, that is a painful choice. During a past crisis, this exact move led to a staggering revenue loss of over 2 lakh crore rupees. That is a huge hit to take. And it's a total double whammy, because while that tax income is falling, the cost of essential subsidies for things like cooking gas and fertilizer is shooting through the roof. So you've got less money coming in and a lot more money going out. It's a classic fiscal squeeze, and that pressure has to go somewhere. And this is where that pressure ultimately lands, right on the shoulders of ordinary families. We've seen this steady and frankly worrying climb in household debt, which has now reached over 41% of GDP. What that really means is that more and more families are having to borrow just to make ends meet.
And this is a crucial point. The money people spend, private consumption, makes up over 60% of the entire economy. But it's running on fumes. It's being propped up more by credit and loans than by people actually earning more money. And that is a very, very risky foundation to build on.
And this isn't just abstract economic stuff, it has a very real-world impact. During a recent cooking gas crisis, for example, the shortages didn't just raise costs, they literally forced small restaurants and kitchens to shut down. Gig workers, like food delivery drivers, reported a 50 to 60% drop in their orders. The people who get hit the hardest are always the most vulnerable.
Okay, so now we've got all the pieces on the table, we can finally go back and solve that puzzle we started with. How can an economy be growing so fast and yet be so incredibly fragile at the same time? Well, the answer lies in how the government gets its money. A huge chunk of it comes from what we call transaction-based taxes, like the GST. This just means the government's income depends on people like you and me constantly going out and buying things. And this really gets to the core of the issue. The government's revenue growth is depending more and more on the volume of transactions, how much we're buying, rather than on income deepening. people actually earning more. In other words, its financial health is tied not to people earning more, but to people spending more. This creates what is a fundamentally unstable model. See, income-based taxes are more resilient because people still generally have incomes during a crisis, but when your system relies on transactions, any shock that makes people cut back on their spending, like high fuel prices, becomes a direct hit to government revenue.
And that, right there, is the solution to our mystery. The big strength, all that infrastructure spending, is being paid for by a big weakness, a tax system that kind of crumbles under pressure from these external shocks. The boom and the fragility, they're just two sides of the same coin.
So knowing about this deep vulnerability, what's the path forward? How can the economy be rebuilt on a foundation that's actually solid? Well, experts point to a pretty clear roadmap for building that resilience. First, you have to diversify energy sources to break that heavy oil dependency. At the same time, the focus really needs to shift to creating jobs and boosting wages so that people are spending from their income, not from credit. That allows for a broader tax base that isn't so dangerously reliant on spending, all while you maintain financial reserves, a buffer, to absorb the next shock that will inevitably come.
And this leaves us with a final, crucial question that goes way beyond just the data. It's a fundamental challenge for policymakers everywhere. In a world that is just full of constant shocks, how do you balance that intense drive for short-term growth with the absolute necessity of building long-term, shock-proof stability?
Thanks for joining us for this explainer. The puzzle of India's economy is a really powerful reminder that those big, flashy headline numbers, they almost never tell you the whole story.